Let's move on to the polling, as Krystal, alluded to. Some actually very fascinating polling just immediately after the conflict, which shows something I always have believed: you have to have faith in people, because people, normal American citizens in most cases, are far more morally clear, understanding of nuance, and insightful, practical, understand trade-offs than people who actually do this for a living, and especially our electeds in Washington. Let's put this up there on the screen. This reflects this directly. Israel-Hamas conflict. What should the U.S. do now? 76% say we should send humanitarian aid to Israel. 72% say we should use diplomacy with countries in the region. 57% say we should send humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza. So we have majority support for humanitarian to Israel, humanitarian aid to Palestinians, and 72% for diplomacy. You know what doesn't have majority percent? Only 48% send weapons and supplies to Israel. And when you start to dig into it even more, it's pretty shocking. Let's go to the next one, please, guys, because this is on partisan lines. For example, should the United States send humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza? This is by party. 70% of Democrats say we should. Independents, 60% say yes. 41% of Republicans say that we should. Now, should not. Only 30% of Democrats, 41% of independents, and 60% of Republicans. Now, should the U.S. send weapons and supplies to Israel? Amongst Democrats, it's under a majority. Only 47% said that we should send weapons to Israel. 45% of independents, 57% of Republicans on the should side. But 53% of Democrats say that we should not. 55% say that we should not, and 43% of Republicans. I mean, this is not an overwhelming issue really at all by far on the side of weapons, on the side of all of that. The only ones, Krystal, that really have super majorities are send humanitarian aid to Israel and conduct diplomacy.
And diplomacy.
And it's interesting that number 2 on that one is probably the least discussed, because if we were to understand that, then Americans should be outraged and horrified at the Biden administration, really Anthony Blinken too's, inept moves in the Middle East, getting his own Middle East summit canceled.
Wow.
You know, in the front of his face. It's just humiliating to the United States and the American presidency.
Not only that, they should be disgusted, as I am, that from the podium, Karine Jean-Pierre would call talks for diplomacy and a ceasefire specifically repugnant, and that they would instruct State Department officials, our nation's diplomats, not to use any language about ceasefire, calm, ending the violence, ending the bloodshed. Americans overwhelmingly want us to be engaged in talks. Support for ceasefire extremely high, especially among Democrats, which this is a Democratic president, extremely high. So when you think about the media coverage of what Israel is doing right now and the horrific attacks on Israel and the direction of the media coverage and how consistently hawkish they are all the time, platform people like Lindsey Graham are calling for all out, holy war, world war as a basis for World War III. And you see you don't have majority support for sending weapons to Israel. You have very clear majority support for caring about the humanity of Palestinians. I mean, I just think given the media coverage, especially on cable news, that is absolutely extraordinary and does show you that, you have, I think it in part shows you that this issue is no longer among the population, is no longer as just like lockstep, we support Israel no matter what, as it used to be. I think part of that is social media. I think part of that is the rise of independent media, where there isn't just this one uniform view that people see. And I also just think, people have hearts. They can see these children who are suffering. They can see the entire population being like starved out in this siege, and their hearts genuinely go out to them. They're able to hold 2 thoughts in their head: that Hamas is evil, that they should be held to account, that there is no punishment too severe for them for what they did to Israel, but also that not all Palestinians are Hamas and that they are just human beings and children in many cases trying to live. So you see that coming through in the polling, and I'm pleasantly surprised, I have to say. There's also an interesting poll from the Wall Street Journal about what direction the American people want the country to go in. And, we talked about the possibility of broader conflict and concern over the spreading into some sort of a hot war with Iran, which is very much on the table right now, given the comments both of the Biden administration and certainly of the Netanyahu administration. Well, American people are not excited about that possibility. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. This is from the Wall Street Journal. They say, do you think the U.S. does or doesn't have a responsibility to protect Israeli citizens? Okay, you've got a majority that say yes, 42% say 42% say no. Protect Palestinian civilians, 41% say yes, 54% say no. But, you're pretty split on even the question of whether you should support Israel in the war, 52-44. You've got majority support for pushing parties to negotiate. And you have much less support and much less interest, though, for working toward Palestinian statehood, 28-66. One of the things that came through in this poll, as it did, Saagar, in many of the polls, is just how much the divide is actually, there is a Democrat-Republican divide, but perhaps the bigger divide is actually generational, where you have young people who view this conflict in very different terms than older generations, which do have more of that just whatever Israel does, we support them, we totally take their side, and that's the end of the story. Voters, especially under 30, but really under 40, taking a much different view of this conflict.
Yeah, and this is all before. It's 50-50 before an actual major ground campaign has been launched with carnage, with death, with daily video of street-to-street, hand-to-hand combat, before protests, before even an American soldier hopefully has been, hopefully has not been brought into this. That's where it is right now, and that's, again, why I trust people, because people aren't stupid. They can see this. They see the headline about American troops getting attacked on a base in Iraq, and they're like, well, first of all, I didn't know they were there, and second, I really wouldn't like to be drawn back into this because my cousin went to Iraq, and he came back, and he was never the same. Who hasn't got a story about something like that? And that is why the younger generation in particular has to be especially worried. They're either the ones with siblings or directly know people who are involved in the latest conflict, and they're the ones really who also had to pay the price in terms of giving up their entire adult life with no peace, in their lives. That the boomer generations, as you said, they have a very different view in general about America, how it should operate.
Well, and I think it's really Cold War influenced,
probably,
too, of just like, the world is black and white. There's the ones that are with us and the ones that are against us, and the ones that are with us, we back them no matter what. And I think that's part of why you get this massive generational divide. I just pulled up, CNN did a poll too, and they asked, is Israel's military response to Hamas attacks fully justified? Okay, so their whole response, the bombing campaign, the siege, et cetera, is that fully justified? If you're 65 plus, 81% say yes. 18 to 34 years old, only 27% say yes. So that's why I say the age divide is really the key driving factor here beyond partisanship. If you're a senior, 65 plus, 81% are like, yes, everything that Israel's doing, totally justified, I'm behind them, et cetera. 18 to 34, only a quarter. 27%. And it goes down like a ladder. It's 56% for 50 to 64 years old. It's 44% for 35 to 49 years old. And then it's only 27% for 18 to 34 years old, which is why, it's always the youth that tends to be at these protests, but it's why you overwhelmingly see young people populating these protests calling for a ceasefire in the region and critical of Israel for what they're doing here.
No, that's well said.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.